A still life is a picture of things or objects. We are going to create a still life using some of the most popular still life items. They're colorful, there are so many different types, and they can grow almost anywhere in the world. Do you give up? They're flowers. To begin our still life, you're going to need a piece of paper, a pencil, and you might also want an eraser, just in case. When we draw a still life, it's best if you can look at the actual objects that you're drawing. So I have some flower pots set up. If you don't have flower pots, that's okay. Maybe you could pause the video and use the flower pots that I'm looking at, or make up the flower pots if you want to. First, we need to figure out where the table is, and it looks to be a little bit lower than the middle. Since we're overlapping, we may have to erase things as we layer objects on top of each other. I'm gonna draw the flower pots in the front first. The first flower pot I'm gonna do is this one right here. It's the second tallest one. It's basically a rectangle, but it has rounded edges, and on the top, I'm gonna add this little lip. Remember to draw your flower pots large. I only have 4 of them, so I wanna make them large enough to go all the way across the paper. But be sure that you're leaving enough space at the top to add the flowers later. Remember, this is a sketch, so I can always go back and adjust things if I need to. The next flower pot that's in the front is the smallest one. And it looks to be just about even with the other front flower pot. Since it's shorter though, it's not gonna come up quite as high. The next pots that we're gonna draw, the last 2, are behind the first pots. So we're gonna have to use some overlapping to make them look like they're behind the other pot. So when we overlap something, it means that it's coming out from behind an object that's in front of it. We're not gonna see the whole entire flower pot basically. So it comes out from behind this little flower pot, and then it goes across and stops when it goes behind this taller flower pot on the right. And the bottom works the same way. We can only see part of the bottom as it shows from behind the first flower pot, and then it gets hidden again by the flower pot on the opposite side. So we're gonna add a little bit of a roundness to it so that it looks more 3D. So there's the flower pot in the back. It's higher than the first 2 because it's farther back, and a little bit of it is showing above, and then it's hidden again behind the one that is taller. And then the final flower pot, it's more like a vase. It's very thin, but part of it is coming from behind this small flower pot in the front. And then it's got a long, thin neck that reaches up. Make sure we're still leaving space for the flowers to come out, so I might cut it down to here. That looks a little bit better. I'm gonna finish the other side. We want them to try to make them as even as possible because this flower pot does look symmetrical. That means it's the same on both sides. All right, that looks pretty good. After you sketch in all the flower pots, then it's time to compare them and make sure that everything looks correct. I'm really happy with the shape of this flower pot. It's not exactly like the real thing, but it's pretty close, and it's an interesting shape. This flower pot, I believe, is a little too big. So I am going to shorten it just a bit. And that's why it's important that we sketched it in pencil, because I can shorten it now. That allows more of this flower pot to show so that I can focus a little bit of attention on the way this lip is shaped, because the pot curves in, then comes back out again. It's details like that that make it look more interesting, so I wanted to make sure I included it. Now the biggest thing that I want to change is this pot over here. I like the shape of it, but after drawing the other pots, I feel like it is now too small. I need to make it taller, but I have to make sure that it's not as tall as the tallest one, and it's only a little bit taller than this second shortest one. So I want this curve here to go higher before the lip comes back out. That looks a little bit closer to the real pots that I'm looking at. This curve happens past the top of this pot that's behind it. Now, because I made it taller, that's also going to force it to be a little bit wider to keep the proportions the same. I am much happier with the size of that pot. It looks a lot more like the still life that I'm looking at. I can go back and I can erase this table now, because we shouldn't be able to see the table through all of these flower pots. So now that I've done that, it looks like these flower pots are resting on this table, and there's a lot of space in the back for flowers.